Hello, thank you very much for joining us in this session. It's a pleasure to see a lot of people because today is it's an exciting day with a lot of interesting activities, so thank you very much. I would like to know how many of you are teaching journalism?
Good.
Only one?
Good. Only one.
Wow.
All right.
Thank you. Two people.
I want to understand who everyone else is.
So what are you doing?
Yes.
Yeah. Like what?
Are you studying or what?
How many
Students.
How many students?
So you are here just to require to the professor what to do next year. Okay. Okay, excellent. So I will explain what is the goal of this seminar, which is very, very easy. This is not a conference, this is not a panel, this is not a session. It's very important to say that. It's better to think in terms of exchange of ideas. What we want is just to know some people from City University of London, people from the US, people from Florida. In my case, I'm from Spain, I'm Juan Luis Manfredi. What we do when we are teaching journalists today. The question is that last year I organized in my university a seminar about how to teach journalists in the new century or whatever this tremendous title. We identify 4 big issues which are relevant, and I would like to share them with you, just to know if you agree, if you have better ideas or best tips, or I don't know. The first idea is about the freedom of expression. In Spain, we have more than 400 new media. I repeat, 400 is 400 new media, which are transforming radically the ecosystem in Spain. It's very, very important because, as you may know, as in other countries, the traditional legacy media have a big, huge debt, and they cannot do a very good journalism indeed. The second point is about entrepreneurship. We are starting to know things about the business side of the journalism. For years, we the journalists and also the G professors dislike to speak about marketing, market share, and I think it's a big mistake. Now we are starting to know how to use the canvas, how to use design thinking, or how to use different tools. The third point is about leadership, because these new media are, at the end of the day, new projects. We have to motivate the students, we have to motivate people, we have to create a bridge of understanding between people from technology and people from the newsroom, which is not easy. And we define it as leadership. And the last point is about new media, which are the tools we are using at the classrooms, which are the technology we are interested in, and which are the main challenges. So what we are going to do is just to have a first round, and George will start. Do you mind if you introduce yourself before? Thank you very much, and of course you are prepared, ready to make questions. Thank you.
Thank you very much indeed, Juan Luis. My name is George Brock, and I teach journalism at City University London, where I was in charge of the journalism school between 2009 and 2014. And because we are doing this interesting thing of swapping international experience here, I'm just very briefly going to introduce the school that I was in charge with so that you understand a little bit about how British university journalism schools work. University teaching of journalism is historically extremely recent in Britain. There were no university journalism schools until the 1970s at the earliest. They began much, much earlier in many other places, including the United States. The school at City University London is big. At any given time, it has about 550 students. A bit over 300 of those are usually master's, postgraduate students. So there are some 30 members of staff, quite a lot of them part-time. When I was about to leave, one of my teaching colleagues said to me, I'm sorry to see you go, George, but there is one upside to this, which is that I'm going to get a rest from change. I did change quite a lot in the time that I was there, but I'm just going to talk very briefly about the thing that probably the biggest single change, I introduced a course which we called, to begin with, Entrepreneurial Journalism. This name was a terrible mistake. After a couple of years, we recruited a professor from America, Jane Singer, who now runs it. She, in her turn, made a lot of changes to it, but the very first change she said was, I really hate this name, and we're going to call it Journalism Innovation. It mixes, there are 10 master's courses at City University, some of them quite specialized, science journalism, financial journalism, specialized ones like that. They're all mixed together in the Journalism Innovation module. They get a certain amount of general teaching about innovation, but the main bulk of the course, they're broken into small teams between 5 and 7 students each. As I say, a mixture of master's courses, and they have to come up with an innovative editorial and business idea. At the end of the course, they get to pitch as a team this idea and plan to a jury of people who do this kind of thing in real life. And of all the experiences I had running the school, watching that pitching session and the dialogues in it and the ideas that students come up with was, I think, the single most enjoyable thing I did ever in the course of an academic year. One student early on in that module had started a student magazine called The Tab. You can look it up on the web. It has many different iterations now. And he went through that module and shortly afterwards raised £100,000 sterling to develop his idea. That's an unusual degree of success. Now, the point that I want to make about the Journalism Innovation course is that it is not about technology. It assumes, of course, digital technology, but it is not based around technology. What it is based around is the idea that journalists have to care about who wants what they're producing and how they consume it. In other words, you have to really care about your audience and your consumer. That's what the course is designed to get them to focus on. Now, in order to get this module running, I had to do the kind of things that people in charge of J schools have to do quite more often than they sometimes admit. I had to overrule people, blackmail them, bribe them, steam open their mail, and generally force them to do things they did not want to do. Partly because there was a minority of faculty who didn't like the idea, but also there was a minority of students. In each of the first 2 years, about 10% of the students sent us back feedback saying, I did not come to a journalism school to get taught about entrepreneurship and innovation. In other words, they were reproducing the idea of their elders that journalism was not in any way about the commercial, organizational, strategic side of journalism. To be perfectly frank about it, I just ignored these objections. There's no other way I can put it. Okay. General philosophy, last point, general philosophy of how I ran the school. You have to practice a balance, you have to make a balance, between practice teaching and theory teaching. We have an advantage, at least I think of it as an advantage in British schools, that the tradition of practice-based teaching is fairly well rooted. In other words, the output of most journalism schools, not necessarily of communications faculties, but of journalism schools in British universities, the output, if you like, is to make people more employable as journalists. So there is always a traditional core somewhere in there. Can you spot information that people might find useful or might want? Can you spot a story in old-fashioned jargon? Can you research it? Can you then project it? Those are timeless skills which operate on any platform. And indeed, the way in which multi-platform teaching must do is it must point in all those directions at once. So I did quite a lot of reorganization of the online teaching. Our online teaching is led by Paul Bradshaw, who, if you know anything about British journalism teachers, is the author of what I think is probably the leading textbook on online journalism and a very well-known online journalism blog. But you have to be very careful not to allow the communications platform, the technology, to lead the content and the journalism. I spend an enormous amount of my time, like a man standing in the middle of a seesaw, trying to fix or moderate between the wish of students to be journalists and the wish of the university that everybody in the department did scholarly research about communications. It's a really tiresome battle, this, but I think it happens in universities all over the world. If anybody wants to ask questions about that, I'm open to them. I'll stop right there. And I'm very happy to lend Juan Luis my pen, who seems to need it. It's a useful technology.
Yeah, I'm saying we're not really a panel, so I'm not sure that I want to give a long speech, but as George said, the system's a bit different in the US, and I won't go through the details, but I keep thinking it's very much broken, and it's difficult to fix because a university is a big bureaucracy. And so to change a curriculum, even within a small department, like journalism departments are often small, maybe 10 to 20 faculty members, right? So among ourselves, we might be able to agree and change it, but then to bring it up to the level of the university administration can take a long time. And so by the time you change it, the industry has already changed. The world has already changed, right? So we try to adapt, we try to route around the damage, like the internet, right? We find new nodes, we go in different directions. But some of the things that I've thought that we need to make sure we do, everything George said I think is true, but there are certain things that maybe we haven't done enough of in the past, and we need to do even more now, and one of those is presenting really great examples of journalism to the students, and modern, new, very recent examples, right? And certainly not only text. Too many of our professors are in love with narrative, with long-form text. Some are still in love with still photography, which I also love. But I don't think we need to look at still photography for 15 weeks in a course, right? We need to look at the kind of videos that Vice News is making, the kind of videos that AJ Plus is making. And we need to talk about how do you tell the story this way? We need to talk about, how to title videos quickly. Not only how to title them the way they title them, big and over top of the picture, but how to get this editing workflow down, because you won't learn that at a TV news station. You'll never learn how to do that in TV news, right? So your chance to learn it is in the journalism school. But our students don't even know that that's a thing, right? Our students are not necessarily looking at Vice News or AJ Plus videos, not yet. Right? Now, they're not looking at TV news either, and they don't know how to do that. But again, they don't need 15 weeks to learn how to be a presenter for TV. My God, why do you have to spend 3 hours a week times 15 weeks to learn how to be a presenter on TV? It doesn't take that long. Audio editing, right? You can teach somebody audio editing basics in 2 hours in a workshop. Why do you have to spend 15 weeks at 3 hours a week on a radio course? And then there's Radio 1 and Radio 2. And if they were out there making a new radio story every week from scratch, then they would learn a lot, right? But that's not what they're doing. They're not making a new radio story from zero every week for 15 weeks. They're spending 4 or 5 weeks learning how to use their microphone, which they're smarter than that. They don't need that much time, right? Now, something like I mostly teach code, that they need a long time because it's very alien to them. And you have to kind of build up a lot of steps, like being a good reporter, right? You have to build with practice. You have to build your interview skills over time. But like learning how to use the microphone, learning how to get good quality audio and then edit it properly and quickly, it's not rocket science, right? But the interviewing and the sensitivity to what's a good story, what's a really good story that hasn't been done before. And I think we also find with very young students, because their exposure to journalism has often not been very much. They pick journalism as what they want to study, right? But they don't really know a lot about journalism. And they haven't consumed a lot of journalism. So again, this idea of presenting them with examples, but especially new examples. Why is this journalism? Why does this serve the public? How does it serve the public? Is it interesting to you? Go show it to your friends. Have the kind of assignment where show this to 3 of your friends and ask them if they thought it was interesting. And then come back and talk about it in class. And let's talk about why it was interesting to your age group or why it was not interesting. And how can we make that important journalism interesting? How can we make a story about Mexico or Syria or what's happening in Turkey? Nobody in the US is talking about Turkey, right? And there's a lot to talk about. South Africa. I think I'm the only person in Florida who knows that something's going on in South Africa right now. I mean, I don't think anybody else knows. I know because I follow South Africans on Twitter. That's how I know. You wouldn't see it in US news. So I think these kinds of things, like getting our students to look at journalism and talk about the story as well as how did they make that, right? Not so much what tools did they use, but where did they have to go? How did they get there on time? How did they get that person? I think those are the kind of things that we need to inject into our curriculum. And maybe not by making a new course or a new class, because that takes too long. But like, tear out, the way the buildings in Italy are done, right? You've got these 1,000-year-old buildings that have modern exteriors. We need to do that with our curriculum, right? Rather than rename all the courses, just tear out the insides of the course called reporting and make it a different course. And that way we can get it through the system faster.
Thank you very much. Marc. Oh, Marc.
I'm Marc Cooper. I'm from the University of Southern California, Annenberg School, where I've been on the faculty for about a dozen years. And I've been a journalist for more than 40 years. And I've done everything. I was multimedia before the word existed, because I was always independent and had to do everything in order to make a living. So I want to just, you're in trouble because you're up here with 5 or 6 professors. So you run the danger of being here for 8 hours and then be graded on what we said. I want to strongly associate my remarks with those of Mindy's, but I don't know if I reach a different conclusion. I'll put my conclusion out there first, and then I'll tell you what I did about it, or what I'm doing about it. My conclusion is that in the United States, and I understand it's a very different system in Italy, it's almost the opposite. In the United States, I'm very dubious that journalism school is worth it, and I'm very dubious about the future of journalism school. I would assert, without any evidence, that if you closed all the journalism schools in America tomorrow, it would have almost no impact on the profession or on the exercise of journalism, unlike, say, medical schools or law schools. Journalism has always been unlicensed in the United States. If there are 400 new media sites in Spain, there's probably 15,000 in the United States, or more. I, as an instructor, put all of my emphasis on the new media because I consider the old media to be dying. And I'm also aware of the fact that my students are probably 20 years away from their peak. If they're 20 years old or 25 years old, they're not going to peak in their careers till 20 or 25 years from now. So I can't be teaching them stuff from 20 years ago or from 40 years ago, as is often the case in a university. Or 100 years. What I do in my usual presentations, which I'm not going to do today, is I do assert that we're living in a time of revolution, of a digital revolution. And like all revolutions, the old system is destroyed before the new system is consolidated. We have no idea what the new system or the new systems are going to be. There might not be a single system, but we have no idea what that is. What I know is that I want my students to be on the curve of that revolution and not be left behind. Universities are very conservative institutions. They're very bureaucratic, they're very slow. They're interested in things other than what journalists are interested in. They're interested in self-glorification, they're interested in enrollment, they're interested in profit, they're interested in self-congratulation. I say that with a good deal of bitterness because my school just spent $65 million on a building, but did not upgrade the web, which has not been upgraded in 4 years. And though our school claims to be digital first, but we don't have a mobile app and we don't have a mobile optimized site among our many sites, which is sort of astounding. But I'm hopeful that in the next year or two, the faculty will learn what mobile optimized sites are, which means that maybe in 5 years, we'll get it. This pace of change, the pace of the media revolution that we're in is, as you know, this is a cliche already, but some cliches are true. It's hyper-accelerated. It's not for the weak. It's not for the meek. And you have to, universities are completely institutionally incapable of responding fast enough. You can begin with the bureaucracy, you can begin, and you end, in the end, you end with the 800-pound gorilla in the room, which is the professor. The professor, in most cases, at least 50, 60, 70% of the faculty has a lifetime appointment. They're tenured, as we call it in the United States. Many of them have not practiced in 15, 20, 25. One of my colleagues hasn't had any practice in 48 years. Yet he's teaching, you know, documentary broadcast. He teaches it without a camera, which is pretty amazing. Of course, when he did it, there were no cameras, so why change? He does it on paper in a time when you can produce a documentary on an iPhone, and so on. And as Mindy said, oh no, it was as George said, you know, we want students to be on the edge and we want them out reporting and producing and learning. And they say, well, I have a test today in the history of journalism class. This is the week we're studying the lithograph. You know, I said, well, that's good. You know, that'll, if you work for a trade paper for lithographs, I guess it would be great, right? We have design classes where the instructors use pica rulers. I don't even know if you know what they are. I've been in journalism 40 years. I've never used one. I know what they are. They're the instruments that's used to measure the columns on a newspaper page. Probably 150 years old or 100 years old. And we're a very modern university. So the question is, if somebody asks me, well, should I enroll in your graduate program for $50,000 a year? I say, no. Of course you shouldn't. There are way too many other opportunities out there. Do I believe that education is important? Yes. Do I think we should have journalism schools? Maybe. But they're only going to be, it depends. If you get some director like George comes in and kicks ass and cleans house, maybe. Otherwise, you're stuck constantly fighting your own institution to try and move forward. Which brings me to the question of how do I teach journalism? Well, let me give you full disclosure. I'm very open in my opinion, and I would say the same things today as I would have said 5 years ago. But I am retiring this year. But the way I taught journalism, and I think I taught it successfully, and there's an interesting lesson here, is that imagine this. In 2009, the University of Southern California Annenberg School, which is arguably one of the two most important journalism schools in the Western United States, competing with Berkeley, though we're much, much bigger. In 2009, our school had no outlet for publication. It didn't even have an old school newspaper. That was run by the school, not by the journalism school. There was no place for our students to publish. We had, and we have, an antiquated daily TV news program, which eats up everybody's time. And we have a 4-day-a-week radio newscast that isn't on the radio. But we didn't have any publication. So I took it upon myself with the administration, and we opened a digital site, and it soon became extremely successful. And the reason it became successful is that you got no credit for it. We did pay some people out of a small budget. But what our strategy was, and I say our, I mean me and really my partner in this, we decided to grant the students maximum autonomy. So we gave them guidance, we gave them backup, we gave them some workshops. But really, they ran that publication, and they ran it with all the innovation that you could imagine because they knew it much better than anybody else on the faculty did, right? So they understood all sorts of social media while you know, half of our faculty still didn't know how to send a tweet, let alone more advanced forms of social media. So we consciously decided that within the parameters of that publication, we were going to teach, or we were going to do everything that the school curriculum did not. If it was, and that was easy, because the school ignored a lot of things. It ignored everything from coding to, which now it does, but it ignored basic knowledge about search, about how the internet, how the web works, how content moves, how websites do and do not exist in the world, what is collective, you know, what is networked journalism, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And we were tremendously successful. But success never goes unpunished in a university. It rarely does. So something quite ironic happened. We fought, knowing that they were going to open this building, which they did a year ago, last August this year, and I'll only take 2 more minutes. We also knew that we were going to switch our curriculum from 2-year graduate program to 1-year graduate program, hoping that cutting the cost by 50% would boost the enrollment. Well, immediately, all the contradictions came to bear. When we tried to streamline that curriculum, all of the vested interest in the university came out and said, well, wait a minute, you can't, the law class can't be 4 weeks, it has to be 16 weeks. Wait a minute, the copy editing class can't be a 3-week module, it has to be 16 weeks. What we did win is that we moved our publications to the center of the curriculum. What we did not fully anticipate was the minute we did that, it killed them. They're not completely dead. But what happened was, as soon as they became subject to all of the rigors, if you will, and strictures of the classroom, as opposed to being out there alone and free, we ran into immediate trouble. Well, I'm of retirement age, so I'd probably retire in any case. But as I've said to my friends who've said, or people have asked me, well, why are you retiring? You're still young and I can have my job forever, which is true. I said, well, you know, when I took this job, I took it because I wanted to teach young people. I didn't take this job to beat 65-year-old people's head against the wall to get them to notice that something had changed under their feet. That's not my job. My job is not to teach the faculty. My job is to teach students. Having said all of that, I'm extremely optimistic about the future of journalism. I just don't think there's much of a I think in some places, with some professors and some moments, there's a close correlation between formal journalism education and journalism as it is now evolving. But most of the time, in the United States, I would say there's very little connection.
Hello. Like that, dude. That was good. Blow it up. Blow it up. Speak the truth, man. You know, from my experience in my own personal life, and I'm sure everybody shares this, sometimes you have to like throw it all out, start from nothing, right? And really rethink of what you're doing with a lot of humility in the conversation. And my name is Ken Harper, by the way, and I'm an associate professor at the Newhouse School, which is at Syracuse University in upstate New York in the United States. And I teach in the multimedia photography and design department. And Newhouse is a communication school. And so what I found very interesting coming from working at newspapers as an interactive designer is the thirst for how to tell a story, and then the ethics that shift depending on what kind of story you're telling, meaning editorial, right, journalism, commercial, all these various things. And, you know, kind of to turn it back to you guys, how many people have been in journalism school? Everybody, right? Okay. What was the best experience you ever had in the classroom? What did they do for you that was great? Can I have one person just tell me, like, give me one example? Like, what worked? Yeah.
It was a course where we had actually to go to the parliament, to the classroom parliament, and talk to politics and write a story about what happened that day in the parliament.
Cool. So it's active. It's not passive, right? So you're engaging in the practice that you were learning. For me, I think is definitely the best way to do it. You know, at the Newhouse School, we're very much a school of practice. We go out and do it. We have dozens of publications that students work at. It's really amazing, from arts journalism to more serious kind of journalism, investigative journalism, and so on. And we also have like small modules, like 1-credit courses that are taught for 3 weeks on various topics, from virtual reality to mobile storytelling and all kinds of things. So I'm very thankful to work at an institution that thinks there's a value in that. And you know, my hope is, you know, other schools, you know, do the same or find their own path that makes a lot of sense. You know, so we've heard like what a really good example is. What's the worst thing that's ever happened in a classroom? What do you think the least valuable thing, right? They may outnumber, maybe, hopefully not, right? The good stuff. What's the most valuable thing that's ever happened in your classroom for journalism? What do you think just should be thrown out immediately? Anybody?
Yeah, I mean, peer feedback from people who've never worked
sorry. Peer feedback in the class situation for people who've never actually worked before. So this was a long time ago, the course I took, and you know, they made us do it on typewriters. So technology change is also interesting.
For sure.
But we had to throw into a basket little pieces of papers with our headlines, and then everybody was asked to criticize everybody else's headlines. It was a horrible experience.
So like, feedback based off of ignorance, right? That's interesting. I mean, we all. What's really fascinating to me is I originally studied photojournalism at a school called Western Kentucky University. I went on to become an interactive designer, and probably the thing I got at most was the critiquing of each other's work. It's funny, but I in the classroom, I totally agree. That often happens. You know, one of the things that we do to teach journalism, myself, is not teach journalism, but teach how to connect to a story, how to connect to your reader, to your viewer, to your user on a human level, how to get students excited about storytelling on a base level, excited to go out and share the stories, and then empower the students with a firm understanding of the ethics of how you share a story, whether it's journalism or whether it's commercial, whether it's fiction, nonfiction, and so on. So if I think back to my undergraduate experience many decades ago now, I think of how long it took me to understand the basics of what the heck a story is and how to make people feel what just happened, even though they're never going to be there. That takes a lot of practice in the field and being with people and doing it. And I think about now with all the technology, I mean, what do you guys, I mean, how much time on the panel here, and everybody's rocking on their stuff, how much time, you were awesome. Hopefully it's not, you know, anything nasty. Okay. You know, how much time do you all spend on sheer technology? I mean, you teach a lot of code, so I understand that's, yeah, that's great.
Practice? None.
You know, in my opinion, the technology takes so much time. We've put so much emphasis on so many disciplines, we've forgotten how to tell a story. We've forgotten how to share our humanity with other people. And so in all my classes, I try and break it down to the most simple element, back to humanity, back to connecting with other people. How can we do that? And not get caught up in kit and gear, in the new widget. There's so much to know. Man, to be a great radio storyteller, that's a lifetime, honestly.
But you can't throw it out altogether.
Of course, no.
Because like the student the student doesn't necessarily own their own equipment yet, so one role a school can play is they put your hands on equipment that they bought for you at first, right? And also sort of walk you through, like kind of jumpstart you over the beginner mistakes. Like rule of thirds, right? Like you tell them rule of thirds and suddenly like 2/3 of them are making better pictures immediately. And how long would it take them to find that out on their own? Maybe a lot longer.
Sure, and I think you never throw the baby out with the bathwater, right? There's so much good stuff in there. And just to come back to balance, you know, back to center.
Just to say, while we're on the kit and gear problem, we learn a lot from the way that we have 2 broadcast master's courses, and they have a very tough organizational philosophy. They only have master students for 10 months. And their idea is to get them through the technology at the maximum rate in the opening weeks. So I always knew, even if I wasn't looking at the calendar, what was the second week of term, because a proportion of the students would be wandering around like pale-faced zombies And I knew that they were the broadcast students because they get so much in the first few weeks. But the philosophy behind that is a constructive one. It is if you don't get this out of the way and you don't master it, you can't really get to grips with the content and the storytelling exactly as you were saying. But some of it involves a bit of tough love. Because in broadcast, there's a bit to learn.
Yeah, I think it's about approach, you know? I think it's about approach, and I think there's a nuance to it. So I wouldn't throw everything away. No doubt about it. Andrew. Hello. Hello, friend.
Thanks again. I thought you were going to drop the mic, just like, you know. Good morning. Thanks for coming early this morning, and I'm sure others, especially with a really strong competitive conference like we have. It's great, and appreciate that we can have a conversation around what I think is really important in terms of journalism education. Let me introduce myself. I'm Andrew DeVigal. I'm, formerly I was the multimedia editor at the New York Times. I was there about 3 years ago. So I agree with Marc in terms of, you know, having educators, having been recent to the professional world. I think there's a huge benefit in that. Currently, I'm with the University of Oregon School of Journalism and Communication. I was hired there last July as the endowed chair of a news center. When I got hired, it was actually called the Center for Journalism Innovation and Civic Engagement. And I think my first, like in London, one of the first challenges that I had to do was, well, I want to rename it. Journalism Innovation and Civic Engagement, I think, is a mouthful, and B, everybody will start calling it JICE. And the acronym with it, the Twitter handle would be JICE, and we didn't know what that meant. So, you know, and I also agree with George in that it's not about the tools or the innovation in technology. What I really believe in when I think of the word innovation, actually, I do default it to technical innovation. And that's one of the reasons why I kind of wanted to actually rename it and actually take out innovation in our title. Because, you know, to me, innovation often really separates us as a community. You know, from mobile phones to even the automobiles, and sorry, the Oculus Rift, in some ways is a way to sort of isolate yourself. To me, I fear that because we're losing the democracy that really we need to thrive as a community. So I really kind of look back into why we wanted to rename it and think about what was the sheer purpose of this center. And civic engagement, I get. I think it's a gap within the journalism schools and the journalism industry as a whole. So I looked at the model of other gathering places or physical places where people actually can get together and actually bring information, deliberate on that information, and perhaps solve the problems of the community within that space. And that's why we ended up calling our center called the Agora Journalism Center, because in ancient Greece, there was that place. It was called the Agora. Agora, sorry. I know Filippo's here, and she's like, no, it's Agora. So as an American, I guess I call it Agora Journalism Center. And I also want to agree with the rest of the panels. I think they gave some great, some points. Mindy, you know, he had asked for great examples. I think that's when very long time ago, I developed a website called Interactive Narratives, interactivenarratives.org. And it was a gathering place, in a way, of great examples. It took a long time to actually kind of curate that and took a lot of energy. So actually 2 months ago, we launched another, it wasn't even a website, we launched a social media hashtag called This Is Journalism. And what we did with that is we just basically encourage all others to submit on Twitter examples of evolving forms of journalism in unexpected places. So even now, it's still open. If you want to use the hashtag This Is Journalism, I think you'll explore and find great opportunities and great ways of new forms. And as Mindy indicated, it's not just text. There's a lot of interactive games in that hashtag. There's a lot of, I mean, I would point to film. We pointed to John Oliver's, you know, skits. I mean, those are great examples. Excellent. Wife. There we go. Thank you very much, Mindy. Okay, I also agree with Mindy that you can't blow up the curriculum. Also with George in this need to balance theory and practice. So I wanted to just point out one of the ideas that we created at the Agora Journalism Center was to actually conduct a build-a-thon. So it's not a hackathon, it's not a 3-day event to sort of hack something together. What we wanted to do was actually build something in 3 days. So what we did was we actually collected and curated teams of developers, designers, and when I say developers and designers, but the creative people within the Portland, Oregon area, which is very rich with technology and creatives, and team them up with working journalists from the Oregonian, OPB, Willamette Week, Portland Business Journal, which is all the local communities. We hooked up with academics within the same build-a-thon as well, and also, more importantly, students. I think the students got an enormous amount of education in those 3 days because they were working side by side with professionals and developers and designers. So it was just, we're about to launch that outcome of that in a few days, so watch our hashtag or watch our Twitter handle. I also agree with Marc in terms of academics again, in terms of going back and forth from the profession to academic world. I think there's a huge value. Before I joined the New York Times, I was actually a professor at San Francisco State University, and I just saw enormous value going from one place, the academic world, to the professional world, and then back to academia at the University of Oregon. So let me end with a couple of predictions for the journalism education. I think people on this panel or even in this conference have always talked a lot about mobile first or being cloud first. I think it's really important to be community first. I think it's really, it's before we even try to recognize what tools to use to tell the story, we need to actually recognize the needs of the community first and foremost, and then be able to actually have that communication and that conversation. I think it's also interesting, I don't want to point out the festival organizers because I think they put on a great festival, but I also just wanted to point out the logo of the festival. It's beautiful, right? Yeah. But it's also all about just talking. They're all dialogue boxes. No one is listening. And you can kind of see how it's beautiful, but it's all just talking. We need to stop talking and just listen. So I think that's where we need to go with our next education, is learn how to listen better and learn how to build empathy to the communities that you're working with, not telling the stories of, working within the community. So my prediction is that this logo will probably be a little bit more of an exchange of the stories we're telling, right? Not just a one-way, top-down distributive model, which is broken. It's all about the communication between the public and journalism and journalists. So many, I suspect, since there's a lot of students here, based on our survey earlier, I suspect, as a lot of journalism students have told me, it's like, oh, I got into journalism because I want to give voice to the voiceless. You know what, folks? They have voice. We're just not listening, right? So we need to be able to reach that. It's not just giving voice to the voices. We actually need to build a platform so that we can actually listen better. And maybe even allow them to tell their story and what's important to them. And they just need to be heard because we're all in part of the same community. So, okay. So what do we teach? I would say that, as Ken said, is how do we connect with your viewer, reader on a personal level? I think the word connect on a personal level, I 100% agree with, because that's what we need to do. Now, in terms of the viewer and reader, I think that's still an old top-down distributive model that we're speaking from. Reader and viewer is still us distributing the stories to them. It's no longer that. Because with the technology and with the interconnected world that we live in, everyone is able to speak, right? We just need to be able to understand and listen. So, other courses we need to teach: how do we listen better? How do we improve empathy? How do we learn to collaborate, not just with each other, but with the public as well? And also, how do we co-create the content with other content providers, AKA the community? So, I think that's all I'm going to say, actually. Other than, I think it's, I I think it's important for us to really think about journalism. You know, the American Press Institute's, one of their definitions of journalism is to provide citizens with the information they need to make the best possible decisions about their lives, their communities, their societies, and their governments. So I think to achieve that, I think there has to be constant innovation and diverse collaboration to serve the public good. Thanks.
Thank you very much. I have a lot of ideas here. I probably have to change completely the way I do my job. So do you have questions? I know there's at least 3 people who are teaching, so they have to do a question. And what about the students? Just 1 second.
Having said that, I've had the chance these last 10 days to go to several congresses and now here to the festival. And after that, I'm considering very seriously to drop out from university. Why? But first, because talking to journalists, all of them say what you need to experience, and you get experience going out to the street, and you go out to the street when you're not in class. Secondly, because well, I'm actually from Spain, and the background I got there, like cultural background, is, and even if I'm studying a degree called cultural industries, my cultural background I consider almost inexistent. For example, I discovered the best Spanish journalists, the most important, I discovered them the 3rd year school. So I go to university, I don't get any experience, I don't get any cultural background, and then theoretically, this June, I will have a title saying, yes, I can be a journalist, and I really cannot. So I just wanted to say, yes, we need practice, of course, but we also need to get a knowledge background. If I, as a journalist, have to cover, let's say, a scientific story, or a cultural story, or a geopolitical one, if I don't study on my own after classes, I don't know maybe what, I don't know what a rocket is, let's say, or I don't know what's the difference between Shia and Sunni Muslims if I want to talk about Middle East. So I think there's also important to have this second insight.
So the question here is how much specialization do we need? So is it a question in the grade or in the undergraduate, in the PhD? I don't know. This is a big question. What do you think?
I think that's a difference in the U.S. system. We don't have, a separate journalism school. The journalism study is incorporated into a bachelor degree. The bachelor degree takes 4 years, and about half of the classes are required to be outside the journalism school. And in a lot of schools, you have to take at least 4 classes, 15 weeks each, 3 credits each, in a specialization. Now, some students kind of waste that specialization. One of the ways they waste it, I think they take their specialization in English writing or literature. It's like, it's more journalism in a way, more writing. But some take their specialization in economics or Arab studies or, political science, right? So possibly this is a difference between the US system and the European system.
When you're learning to be a journalist, formally or otherwise, one of the things you're installing is a bullshit detector. And one of the first tests of the bullshit detector is spotting a course that claims to teach you journalism but actually does nothing of the sort. We have this problem in Britain too. Universities found it very easy and indeed actually profitable to start courses with some combination or permutation of the words journalism, media, and communications. Where that is a university where all of the people teaching on it, none of them have actually been journalists, nor do they invite in to teach the journalists people who are doing it, the bullshit detector should go bzzz, because that's the wrong place to be.
I'm going to excuse the, I'm going to put apart the Italian experience, which I lived in Italy 35 years ago, but somehow I missed what the system was here for journalists. And I was shocked, actually, this week to learn what it is. I find it incredibly archaic. So I'm not talking to Italians who have no choice, but to get their credential. Nothing is more important than the specific knowledge that you can bring to your work. And I think it was it Mindy who said that learning how to cut audio isn't rocket science? Or, yeah. Well, journalism itself is not necessarily rocket science either. It's basically storytelling. Some people have a natural talent for it, some people don't. In the 2-year program that I taught, maybe it's arrogant of me, but I could usually determine after 4 or 5 weeks who was really going to be a journalist and who wasn't. And those who were really going to be a journalist could have done it without the school. The school might help them, probably help them, allow them to exercise. And the other ones really don't stand a chance because they don't have the drive, they don't have the curiosity, they don't have the basic interest. I interviewed an alum the other day who came to me and I knew from the beginning she wasn't going to get a job. And she came to me, she graduated a year ago, and she still doesn't have a job. And she said she wanted my help. And I said, well, good. What kind of journalism are you interested in? And she didn't have an answer, which means that, you're not going to have a job. So my suggestion, if you will, is that one should go and take their undergraduate work or their graduate work and whatever it is that they're interested in, find what really motivates them, find out what they really want to dig into in life, and then you begin to write or produce content or whatever you want to call it. You begin to make journalism about that. In the world that we live in now, I am not interested in who thinks they are a journalist or they're not a journalist or they're a blogger or yada, yada, yada. It means nothing. Anybody can make journalism if they want to. Whether it finds an audience or not, we don't know. But you have to but we do live in a period of time. We live in a period of time where the cost of production of journalism, the cost of publishing has been reduced basically to zero. That's quite a moment in humanity. So if you want to be a journalist and you're not already writing, you're not already blogging, you're not already trying to freelance, you're not already trying to report, you're probably not going to be a journalist because the truth is you don't really want to be one. It's not that difficult to start writing. You can do it now on your iPhone. And you can even find a small audience. And you don't know where that is going to lead. What I tell my students is, you have, for example, we have a class that I think is silly. We have a class where the students are taught how to build a resume site for a journalist. Well, for journalists, there's only one resume site. It's called Google. So if you come to me and you want to work for me or you want to write for me, I don't care what your resume site says. I'm going to Google you and see what you've done. What have you done? Have you written 12 articles already about Spain? Have you written 15 articles about this ecological situation in Nicaragua? Have you talked about the trade unions in South Africa? Do you understand the real powers that be behind the Italian parliament? You have to show me that there's something that you're bringing to the table. And the rest, I'm sorry, the rest is easy. An editor can fix your copy. A developer can add that multimedia element that you're missing that it's going to really make your report sing. But at the center there has to be you, and there has to be passion and knowledge. Otherwise, you bring nothing to the table.
Sorry, we only have 5 more minutes left. Oh no, Jan's leaving. I was gonna call her out. But since we only have 5 more minutes left, what I wanna do is use it, 2 more minutes left. What I wanna do is hear 3 questions from the audience right now. If we can pass the mic really quick, just to hear the 3 questions, because I wanna hear from you guys, what you guys are thinking, and what you guys are really hungry for. Can we pass the mic? No? Here we go.
Yesterday in another panel teaching journalists today, we talk about the Italian digital culture gap. How do you think we could close this gap with the rest of the world?
Okay. Another one? Okay.
Seeing what a journalist now needs to do today, like be able to tweet, be able to write, being able to edit videos, being basically able to do everything. What, in your opinion, makes a good journalist today?
I think it's a myth that journalists. I think it's a myth that journalists have to do everything. That's not true. You should probably be aware of everything, and you should be flexible and understand different platforms. But there are people who are going to be much better writers, people who are going to be much better videographers, much better developers in a way. My short answer to you is what I said 3 minutes ago. You must be able to demonstrate a passion and knowledge about what you want to cover. You just can't say, I have a degree, or I want to be a journalist, or I want to do this. You have to say, I want to talk to you about this work that I've been doing and want to expand now.
I think as far as technology goes, I think making something so compelling, everybody wants to use it, see it, read it, be a part of it. Something that allows communication, two-way communication, and with a lot of empathy and a lot of passion. So I think it's up to people to start. You can never wait for an answer. You have to create a solution for yourself. And if it's a good enough solution, people will come with you.
I would echo the word I used earlier in terms of collaboration. You know, when Ken and I were up and coming back in the day, you know, we were so focused on the one-man journalist, right? The backpack journalist. I think those days are gone. I think when people are trying to do all of it at once, something suffers. So I think it's key to collaborate. First, identify your weakness. Identify what you're not good at, which is, of course, you know, something hard, difficult to swallow. And then collaborate. Collaborate the people that can fill your gaps.
I think, yeah, along with what Marc was saying about like knowing, being passionate about something specifically, right? Like now, you're young. Maybe you don't have a very specific thing yet. But at least an area, at least you can answer the question, what do you want to do journalism about? Or what kind of journalism do you want to do? You should be able to answer that question without having to think about it, right? Like that's that kind of indication. If I ask you what kind of journalism do you want to do, and you look at the ceiling and you say, you know, it's like, I mean, unless it's your first week in journalism school, that's not good, right? Like there needs to be something in your heart that makes you want to do this kind of work. And then the other thing, along with what Drew was just saying, it goes back to what you said about voices too, because, or maybe it was Ken saying this, but you need to be able to reach out to your audience and make them care about the thing you care about. So the first thing is you have to care about it, or you'll never be able to make anybody else care, right? But the second thing is, how are you going to make them care? And I think one of the things that happens with, you know, really young people who want to go into journalism, they're kind of caught up in their own voice. In other words, they want to speak. They want to speak to an audience. And it's not exactly journalism. It's more like you want the audience to become aware of things in their world that should matter to them, or that they should know about, or that do matter to them and they don't already know that, or that matter to them but they don't think anybody knows that they care about these things. You know what I mean? This sort of like, not just writing, I feel, but more that elevating what other people feel or need or desire or care about, and having people who are not them understand that, right? You're like a bridge. And to be able to do that with video or images or writing or code or anything, then you can make a place in the world for yourself.
Okay, really quickly. I'm going to use the one that works. Really quickly. I don't have to say anything about versatility versus specialization because Marc just said it all. Culture gap. If you have a culture gap, the one thing the EU provides you is the opportunity to go to universities in other countries. I'm not necessarily talking about Britain, but you will find university journalism schools that don't have a culture gap, digital culture gap. Go find them. It's not easy, but that's the only way you can do it. If you drain all the students out of the Italian system will change. If you really want to see how job opportunities are going to generate, go to the session that Juan Luis is chairing tomorrow morning about journalism in Spain. This is a really, really interesting scene. You want to see this in action? Spain is a great, great example. It's going to be discussed in full at 10 o'clock tomorrow. I leave you with the words of the late, great David Carr. Keep typing until it becomes writing.
Thank you very much for your time. Just final word, one tweet. One final thought. Yes, if you want to be a journalist, you want to be a superhero because you have to innovate, to be a researcher, to entrepreneur, to teach, to be a specialized guy, so you are a superhero. My final thought is very easy. This is not a roundtable about technology, this is about journalism. And two final words, curiosity and passion. Sounds very good. Thank you very much.